Welcome everyone out to the board meeting this evening. Ms. Namika, would you please take the roll call?
Mr. Clausen,
Here.
Ms. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. Schwartz,
Here.
Mr. Taylor,
Here.
Ms. Upchurch.
Here.
Thank you. To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to Board Docs website can be found via the D38 www.lewispalmer.org on the Board Education Meeting webpage. Mr. Schwartz, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I'd be happy to. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
of the United States of America,
to the republic
to the republic
for which it stands,
which it stands,
under God,
one nation,
indivisible,
under God,
with liberty,
indivisible,
for all.
with liberty and justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips, Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye, faster than Miss Phillips.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Namika. Ms. Phillips, would you be gracious enough to go through the recommendations, or excuse me, recognitions and comments?
I sure will. Our first recognition is for Allstate Orchestra and Band. The board recognizes Allstate Chair Band and Orchestra students under the direction of Mr. Tom Chapman, Band Director for Lewis Palmer High School, and Mr. Butch Eversole, Band Director for Palmer Ridge High School, per Mr. Chapman at Lewis Palmer High School. Selected for Allstate Orchestra, Sam Bloomfield and Sarah Wright. Wind and percussion players compete for an opportunity to perform with one of two Allstate orchestras through the submission of prepared etudes from across the state of Colorado. Selected for Allstate Band, there are two different Allstate bands, concert and symphonic band. Concert band participation is open to 10 to 12 students attending schools of less than 1,100 students. Symphonic band participation is open to all 11 to 12 students, or 11th to 12th grade students. Due to size, Palmer Ridge High School only qualifies for symphonic band, while Lewis Palmer qualifies for concert band, although this is likely the last year for that qualification. Selection to either band is determined by live audition of prepared excerpts. This year saw 859 students audition from 161 schools. The following Lewis Palmer High School students were selected for either the concert or symphonic band: Allison Sobers, Abby Schmitz, Jackson Richardson, Noelle Ayers, Camille Olliger, Owen Pike, Susanna Houston, Samuel Bloomfield, Sarah Sorensen, Annabelle Hall, and Henry Taylor. Per Mr. Eversole from Palmer Ridge High School. These students were selected by audition to the Allstate Orchestra. Students grade 10 to 12 are eligible. The event took place at CSU February 6th through 8th, with a concert presented on February 8th. Emily Fev, oboe, Laura Lambrecht, oboe, Lydia Wright, oboe, and Katie Betts, French horn. Of note is that 8 oboists were selected statewide and 3 were from Palmer Ridge High School. The following Palmer Ridge student musicians were selected by audition to the Colorado All-State Symphonic Band. The event was to be held April 2nd to 4th at UNC, but was canceled for obvious reasons. The 2 honorees are Emily Fev, oboe, and Nathan Kopaz, tenor sax. Should I go on to the next recognition?
If you would, please.
Sure. The next recognition is for the Colorado Women's Volleyball Player of the Year. Lewis Palmer High School student and Colorado High School volleyball champion, Gianna Bartalo, a player for Coach Wade Baxter, is recognized by the board for her achievement. The Sportswomen of Colorado is an organization that promotes and empowers women in sport. Each year, they choose one representative across the state from each sport at the high school and college level. This year's winner for high school volleyball in the state of Colorado is Gianna Bartalo. She was celebrated by Sportswomen of Colorado at an awards banquet on March 15th. Ms. Bartalo has excelled at quite a number of things. She is a 4-year varsity starting libero for the volleyball team, a part of the 4 state championship titles for the volleyball team at Lewis Palmer High School. She is involved with student council as a letter winner and president. She is a 4-year academic letter winner. She was named to CHASA's second team Allstate in 2018, and then named to CHASA's first team Allstate in 2017 and 2019. She has been honored by the Pikes Peak Athletic Conference First Team and Player of the Year in 2019. She holds school records, including 37 digs in one match, 725 digs in one season, 8th all-time high in CHASA. She has a career 1,948 digs, which is 4th all-time CHASA. She has hit 211 aces, a school record broken at this year's state tournament. She has accepted a scholarship to play at the University of Denver and has had 3 older sisters play volleyball for Lewis Palmer High School. She is a speaker coordinator and leader for FCA, a member of National Honor Society, Rho Kappa, and a Link leader. She is a 3-time Ranger Roundup leader. She's a DECA member and 3-time state qualifier for DECA. And on top of all of those accomplishments, she has also committed time to volunteering at Jackson Creek Senior Living and the YMCA. Congratulations to Ms. Gianna Bartolo on her recognition as the Colorado Women's Volleyball Player of the Year.
Nice.
Our next recognition, the board recognizes the Palmer Ridge High School Wind Ensemble and the Monument Academy Choir for their success at this year's CMEA Awards. Regarding Palmer Ridge, under Director Butch Eversole, the Palmer Ridge High School Wind Ensemble was selected as an honor performing group through a blind audition process. Honor groups are selected as model ensembles for music educators and school music programs across Colorado. Only 3 high school concert bands are selected to perform. A group may be selected no more often than once every 3 years. This performance was the 3rd time for the PRHS Wind Ensemble. They had been selected in 2014, 2017, and this year in 2020. Regarding Monument Academy, under choir director Desiree Floyd, the Monument Academy Choir was chosen from an audition pool of 116 schools as one of the 16 honor performance choirs for the 2020 Colorado Music Educators Association State Conference. Additionally, they were one of only 4 middle school choirs chosen, and this was the first time a Monument Academy ensemble was selected to perform for the state conference. Our 4th and last recognition is that the board would like to recognize Mr. Steve Waldman, D38 parent and chess team coach, for success in hosting the 14th annual Lewis Palmer School District Chess Tournament held Saturday, February 22nd at Lewis Palmer Elementary School. A list of student trophy winners is attached. And from Mr. Waldman, I'd like to read the following. The tournament has grown every year from about 30 chess players for the first year to now over 100 students demonstrating their skills. Our annual chess tournament is probably the second largest school district chess tournament in the entire state of Colorado. We have chess players from kindergarten through high school participate. They each play 4 games against students in their own grades, and at the end of the day, we award trophies and medals. Despite the fact that the chess games can be very stressful and demand a great deal of concentration, there is a high degree of sportsmanship demonstrated by our players. This tournament could not succeed without the wonderful help of many members of our community. We are always in debt to Lewis Palmer Elementary School Principal Jenny Day for allowing us to use her school every year. Also, the custodians at the school provide great support. This year, we were again fortunate to have the assistance of Prairie Wind's retired teacher, Peter Wise, who worked as a chess judge to mediate issues involving chess players, as well as 2 parent volunteers. In addition to the chess judges, we received tremendous assistance from Anita Shue, the gifted teacher at Bear Creek Elementary, Annette Bass, the district gifted education facilitator, and Cindy Waldman, the reading interventionist at Bear Creek Elementary School. We are further in debt to the Key Club students and other students from both Lewis Palmer High School and Palmer Ridge High School who helped set up for the tournament, register chess players, manage concessions, and assist with cleanup. Without their assistance every year, we would not be able to have this tournament. Finally, we need to thank Dr. Summers and the school board for providing us with the support that allows us to have this tournament every year. We look forward to having the tournament for many years to come. Thank you, Steve Waldman, Chess Tournament Director.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. And once again, we'd like to recognize everyone that Ms. Phillips went through, and we sincerely apologize that you can't be here in person, but congratulations on your accomplishments. Next, we'll briefly go through the public comment guidelines. Per board policy BEDH, public participation at school board meetings, there is one time for public comments and it is limited to 30 minutes in an effort to allow all who wish to speak. The amount of time dedicated to each speaker will depend upon the number of people who sign up. The entire public comment period not exceeding 30 minutes. If 10 people or fewer sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. During meetings held through electronic participation only, members of the public shall be allowed to address the board by sending written comments to the secretary of the board at knamika@lewispalmer.org, identifying subject public comment in the subject line of the email. Comments must be received by 12 p.m. noon the day prior to the meeting. Written comments must be no more than 400 words, approximately 3 minutes, must clearly identify the subject submitter by name and must not contain profanity and must not reference student names and must not defame any individuals by name. Public comments that do not abide by these requirements shall not be shared. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of schools. We believe that public comments that are critical of district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to employees and to the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticisms of employees in writing with superintendent, who is responsible for supervising all staff and then involving the board as necessary. If you choose instead to address personnel issues publicly, please understand the board does not endorse the comments of any speaker and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by district employees in the event the affected employee believe that any comments about them violate legal standards. Lastly, keep in mind, we may have K through 12 students appearing electronically. Please keep all comments appropriate to the audience. With that being said, Ms. Namika, did anyone
We
bear
didn't
with me for one
receive
moment?
any public comments, Mr. Clausen.
Just bear with me for one moment, please. Ms. Namika, will you please confirm that we did vote on adopting the agenda as presented?
We did, yes.
Okay. And I believe it was officially approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just received a text message and I want to make sure that we covered that.
I think so.
Perfect. Since there are no public comments, we'll move on to board member comments. Mr. Taylor, we'll start with you, sir.
Thanks, Matt. So, Casey, again, I can't compliment you enough because of the job you're doing in the circumstance, and your staff and the principals and the teachers for online training. We have that experience in our home, and there's a vast array of differences that occur. I think the biggest loss is just connection, and at least the homeschool does provide some level of connection. The virus, the COVID-19 virus, is an amazing thing that's happening in our whole country, and obviously the New York area is hit as hard as any area. In the state of Colorado, 90% of our deaths have been people who are 60 or older, meaning, if you're 60 or younger or 59 or younger, there's only 10% of the deaths. Now, that's in line with what I've learned is that essentially, if your immune system is in any way, shape, or form affected, like as we age or as we have asthma or whatever, I mean, it's generally speaking, there's a segment of our population that is really at risk, whether it's the COVID-19 virus or any other virus. I'm a little disappointed in our governor who, wants to stay shut in and shut down. And there are some other states that are starting to open up life again. It doesn't mean we're without risk. I'm not trying to downplay a very contagious virus. But when you just look at the statistics that are available as of yesterday, this seems to have a low risk in the schools. And I wouldn't suggest that we reopen anything, Dr. Summers. I'm really suggesting that, as I mentioned at our work meeting, are we as a school district working with the county health team on up to CDC, et cetera, and considering the possibility of testing, because this isn't going to change this fall when school is ready to begin again. And the thing that I see, generally speaking, is if we have testing, and they've now developed tests that can give you a result within 5 minutes. If we have testing in place, it seems like we could reopen schools this fall. I know we don't have that today. I know we don't have testing that would tell you if you've already had it. So there's still some weaknesses and shortages in place, but looking forward into the fall, I'm hopeful that, we as a school district under your leadership will seek to be testing centers for our county, and in so doing, be prepared to open our schools and then work with the other superintendents that are from El Paso County, and try and be proactive so that at least life for our children can return to some sort of normalcy come this fall. That's really all I had, and thank you again, Dr. Summers, and all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Schwartz?
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to piggyback and accentuate what Mr. Taylor said in terms of the entire team of the district. for doing yeoman's work to ensure that the staff and the students are safe and that they move forward with their education and their careers. That matters greatly. Secondly, in the spirit of returning to some semblance of normalcy, I'd like to continue the tradition we began to highlight one of the schools in the district at each board meeting and give a couple bullets about the daily magic that they're doing with their staffs and their students. And this month's will be Prairie Winds Elementary School. And before this outbreak happened, we prepared some things that they were doing really neat in the school year. I'm going to start with those, or in the regular school year, I should say. They have this learning environment that they call being a quality friend, neighbor, and peer. And the actual action they do is they have a program called We Caught Ya Being Kind. And when the student gets caught being kind by a member of the staff or the faculty, they do not get expelled, they do not go to detention, but they actually get their picture up on the wall. And they get wonderful positive recognition from their peers, their friends, their teachers, and the administration about the value of being a good community member and taking care of your friends and your peers. The other thing they do is they highlight the lasting educational effect. And so for one example that they took action on is the 6th grade math teacher had the entire class bake cookies and then cut them up and learn how to manage fractions and do math with fractions. And Mr. Summers, if you'd allow, I'd like to sit in on that class next semester and make sure that the quality is just right. But the result for the students, in all seriousness, is that they're able to transfer the academic skills into basic daily life skills, which really prepares them for the next level. And then finally, Prairie Winds, they're doing a beautiful job of managing this transition from face-to-face traditional learning to temporary remote learning. And their staff is really laser focused on working as one team to make sure they understand and then meet the new needs of their students. And they've been very successful throughout the team of leveraging positive motivation of the students and themselves, and make sure that that transcends through the organization, whether they do it directly or through distance. And they do this in areas such as weekly team meetings, a Friday fun activity, and a consistent method of ongoing individual support wherever it's needed. So to Ms. Walsh and her team at Prairie Winds, kudos to them for making sure that when things are normal, things are great. When things aren't normal, they're still darn good.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Ms. Upchurch?
Thank you, Mr. Clausen. I don't have much to say. I echo the sentiments that Mr. Taylor and Mr. Schwartz already said. I can't begin to thank enough the leadership and the resiliency and the tenacity that I'm seeing from our teachers and our families and our kids. Thank you, Dr. Summers, for your collaboration with our other fellow superintendents in the area and with the state and staying on top of things. As we all know now, the governor did indeed say that we will no longer have in-person learning for the rest of the school year. And with that comes that same sentiment that I shared at our work session, that it is heartbreaking for our students that we're looking forward to celebrations, for all the hard work that they put forth, from plays to proms to athletic events and everything in between, even something art shows and book fairs. But with that has come a lot of creativity, and I've been watching around the nation on how other school districts are handling things like graduation, to even our own Air Force Academy graduation this past Saturday, where they managed to have every single cadet on the field sitting 6 feet apart from each other and still able to be able to enjoy that rite of passage in their graduation. So I'm hopeful that as we continue throughout the rest of the school year, that we see ways to overcome and ways to still celebrate and honor our students and our teachers and our staff. Teacher Appreciation Week is still May 4th to May 8th. And while we won't be able to be in the buildings showering our teachers with love, with goodies and hugs and all that goes into celebrating our teachers and our staff, I hope that our parents and our families find ways to creatively recognize and say thank you to our teachers and staff in the district. So I guess that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you all, and I hope everyone is well and safe. And that's of the utmost importance right now, is making sure that we're keeping everybody's best interests at heart. So
Thank you, Ms. Upchurch. Ms. Phillips?
Thank you. I had a few things that I wanted to comment on that have continued even amidst this great pause. And I'll just list them out here. Thoughtful and thorough communication from our superintendent to all of our stakeholders, both families and our larger community. Sincere concern for our graduating seniors. So many faculty and staff are working hard to provide recognition that is meaningful and commensurate with this milestone and their accomplishments. There is continued forward movement on data gathering for future decisions for our board regarding enrollment projections and costs to renovate the Grace Best Elementary School site. A high school virtual play is being constructed. Teachers and staff have been meeting our students where they are at, and in the words of one elementary teacher, quote, doing right by our kids. This includes a kindergarten teacher at Bear Creek Elementary School who came off maternity leave early just so that she could teach and reconnect with her students. Principals who are leading their staff and families in consistent ways that go beyond the norm. They are leading with empathy, gratitude, and countless hours because they care ultimately about the well-being of people and their students especially. A teacher hearing that one child was having a struggle that day and the family needed to pull back from the online presence just to regroup. She simply asked if it was all right to FaceTime her student later in the day to say hello. And she did just that on her own time. A school district that is, quote, staying the course in order to create continuity, care, and educational opportunity for our students amidst what feels like a crazy situation. I'm proud to be a part of this community that is supportive, leaning into our many challenges and supporting creativity, innovating to support learning at all levels. And thank you, Dr. Summers, for all of your efforts.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. I want to echo the comments of my fellow board members. I also want to especially acknowledge everyone here at Big Red. When I first heard that of the online learning for our students, I presumed things would really slow down here. And matter of fact, the contrary is what has occurred, where most of the team at Big Red is spending significantly more time than they would have if school was in session. I also want to thank our wonderful teachers and the rest of the D38 team members. So any given day, I have 4 kids online doing online school, and I've taken the opportunity to sit in on a couple online classes and video presentations. And there's no doubt in my mind why our kids perform so well, and it's because of the great teachers that we have in District 38. Also want to thank all of our medical personnel and first responders and anyone else that might have been and is on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a niece that's in New York, ground zero, and some of the stories that she's shared with us, quite frankly, are a little terrifying. And I sincerely hope that the nature of this virus does not come and cause the same type of effects here in Colorado. Lastly, just want to encourage you all to take advantage of the local businesses here in Monument, specifically our restaurants and anyone else that has been open. My wife and I try to go out a couple times a week and eat at our takeout to go from some of the mom and pop type restaurants, and many of those individuals that I've interacted with just mentioned they're days away from closing. So any support that we could give to our local businesses, I think would be much appreciated. So with that, Dr. Summers, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you all for those gracious comments. We really appreciate all the support that our board is showing at this time. That's also reflected in the support that we're receiving from our families, our parents, and our students are up to the task, and also just being very gracious in the way that they are adapting to a situation that nobody could have envisioned. As I reflect back, the last time we had our March meeting, I believe that was our last official in-person meeting, and it was one that was just at the precipice of what this now has become, which is an extended closure, which is really devastating in a lot of ways. And I would just add that we miss our kids, we miss our staff, we miss our families, we miss seeing you, we miss the ongoing interactions that are so essential to what it means to be part of a school community. And nonetheless, we continue to persevere, we continue to be resilient, and that is a testament to the amazing efforts of all of our teachers who are working countless hours and ensuring connections are occurring and continuity of learning. Our principals, our central office administrators doing a fantastic job. We have food service workers that are distributing meals every day to families in the community. We have still a grounds and maintenance team that's working to keep our facilities safe and clean. And we're trying to run as efficiently as possible as we work through this. And certainly we continue to try to prioritize taking care of our people. We wish we could be together and celebrate each other in in-person mode. I know that's a big question that's on everybody's mind, and that's something that we're working really hard at figuring out creatively and responsively what we may be able to do to still honor the outstanding work and efforts of our students as they're moving on to bigger and better things. And as soon as that communication becomes available, like we continue to do, we will make sure to circulate that and make sure that we're being as timely and as clear in those action steps, with an acknowledgement that this is probably one of the most challenging types of events to really be as definitive as we possibly can, knowing that there's certain things we just don't have control over, but what we do have control over is ensuring the health and the safety of our students, our staff, and our community. So again, appreciate everyone's efforts to that end, and thank you again, board, for all of your support and leadership during this time.
Thank you, Dr. Summers. I neglected to also publicly acknowledge Vicki and Kathy Namika for the time and effort they put forward to arranging this meeting via Zoom. It was a little more complicated than I think we initially anticipated, but they've done a wonderful job. So thank you so much, ladies. We'll now move forward to the monthly budget discussion. Mr. Tyler, I believe this is you, sir.
Good evening, board. This is Dave. I'm kind of in an area where I'm not getting the camera as well, but can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. What I wanted to talk to you a little bit about tonight is kind of where we are in our plans for presenting a preliminary budget and a finalized budget in May and June. Looking at what what I gave you guys in your report is kind of a fiscal report and 6 different kind of scenarios that we have, depending on the anticipated reductions of revenue that we may receive from the state. What's crazy is everything is up in the air. We won't know any of these reductions we're anticipating. We're taking a conservative approach, but we really won't know anything until the middle of May, till the late May. And that's going to be a little late as far as presenting something to you guys, but we want to, still have that conservative approach. And as we get closer to that number, then when we work into June, we'll have a solid understanding of what our revenue is, and we can share that with you. But by giving you some of these scenarios, it'll allow you to kind of understand our approach and where we're going, how we're moving towards that goal. The big numbers right now that I'd like to share with you tonight, just briefly, is that we are basing our budget on a student enrollment funding of, student enrollment number, FTE, at 6481.5. That's a little bit down from last year. It's about 100 from last year, from what was originally budgeted. But I believe that's, looking at our demographers, looking at what our student count is right now, that's a pretty safe, conservative approach. The other number is that equates to roughly, and you'll see, and you saw in the scenarios, probably around a $7,900 PPOR per pupil revenue, operating revenue. So you would multiply that out by the 6481.5 number, and that's where you get your revenue. And then from there, we factor in all the transfers and the changes and the additions that we're going to have with our general fund. So this really tonight is just information for you to have to see kind of what I presented was a 1%, a 2%, and a 3% decline in revenue. And then looking at what are the things that we really want to continue to have and take care of. And those pieces are our health benefits for all of our staff, which is something that we don't want to look at pulling away from. That's, the staff is already getting hit with a 1.25% para match increase from this year to next year. And so we all believe that's an important piece, is to continue with our health insurance and provide that to our employees. The other thing is to provide them as much as we can a minimal increase from this year to a salary increase. That would be a step increase for our certified and for our classified, so for all of our staff. And so the scenarios that you see tonight have 2 pages for each one of those decreases, and one reflects what the cost would be with funding or with increasing our, with allowing for those steps to happen, and then with not allowing those steps if we were to freeze that. Dr. Summers, is there anything I'm missing on that? Did you want to add? Are we good? We can keep going?
Just a quick note of clarification in terms of what one of the aspects of essentially a modified salary schedule, which would accommodate a $500 step increase for all teachers, which comes out to about $250,000 total. And then classified staff would maintain their level change, which is based on their respective salary schedules. So when we're presenting that 451 and change salary step increase, that's where that total amount is coming from. So that would be a possibility that we would want to continue to explore, keeping in mind that depending on the percentage reduction in revenue that we're hearing from the state, it could be anywhere from that 1% range all the way up to at latest or last glance, I believe up to 6%. So we're hearing it could be somewhere in that range. And I believe as you're seeing the scenarios, each percent represents about a $500,000 hit to our budget. Is that correct, Dave?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. We are going to continue to build our draft budget at a 1% decrease. And then as we get closer to the end of May and into June, we'll continue to communicate with you, as well as making some of those adjustments in the revenue as we know more information coming from the state. We feel that our enrollment number is a safe one. I don't think we'll have to make very much adjustment on that. If anything, maybe it'll increase. So that PPOR number is going to be about the same, unless we have a little bit more of a decrease, like Dr. Summers just referred to.
Mr.
Do you
Cruz?
board have any questions that I can help answer?
Yeah, I do, Mr. Cruz. This is Ron.
Hey, Ron.
Hi. 2 questions back on the on the salary piece. First, I'll ask them at the same time. First one is, over the last 5 years, what's the sum total, if there's been any, of the increase that the applicable staff has received on a percentage basis? And then the second piece is the $500 that was discussed. Is that a one-time or a reoccurring increase?
So the answer to your second part would be, this is sustainable funding, sustainable expenditure. So this would continue next year. And as we, as things change, we'll probably, our intention would be to help continue to increase people's salaries as we move through it, depending on our revenue and our economy. But yes, that is something that is going to continue. If Bob is out there, Foster, maybe he could help me a little bit more on the 5-year history. I believe last year was a $500 and a 2% increase for certified staff. Bob, do you have some other information off the top of your head that you could give Rob?
I can probably not do so off the top of my head. I'm spreading out salary schedules as we speak, though, to try to give you an estimation, because we have changed the construct of the salary schedule in the last year and a half. And then the other thing that makes this a little more complex, Mr. Schwartz, is, as you know, a couple of years ago, we gave steps back. So anyone who was here during the years in which we were frozen regained those salary steps. Right. So for some people, that was a fairly hefty amount. If looking back over the last few years here, if you give me a minute, I can probably run a rough number.
While you're doing that, I'll ask the $100 million question behind all this, for either Mr. Cruz or Mr. Summers. How do these steps help us get to parity for the staff with their peers around the state?
Well, I think this year we're probably, I'll just say I feel like we're doing probably more than some others, because the people, at least around the Pikes Peak area that I've talked to, they're anticipating this reduction, and they're also anticipating that there won't be any increase and perhaps freezes with their salaries. But we're all in the same. We all have the same concern as far as not only of this hitting us this year, but what is this going to look like for the next couple of years, and how are we going to how do we address that and continue to have our quality staff being paid what they need to be paid?
So if we did these increases and the $500, any feel for how we're doing on bridging the gap?
I don't think it's going to help greatly, but it's going to continue. It's an improvement. This isn't what our intention would be, and to have this happen to us just, obviously a couple months ago, this wasn't our plan. But with the anticipated reduction in revenue, we're going to, what it comes down to is, if you continue to create spending that's sustainable, that's going to be reoccurring, it's going to affect, and you're not getting the revenue that you usually get, it's going to hit your fund balance. And we want to make sure that we have enough to keep our district running at the same time. Dr. Summers?
No, I think you answered that well. I would just put it quite bluntly, Mr. Schwartz, it doesn't necessarily get us to where we want to be, but what it does do from a $500 increase perspective is it helps offset what take-home pay is going to look like for staff in accounting for the para employee paid costs, as well as the addition to healthcare costs that are also increasing. So it gets us, helps staff, I would say, be able to maintain as close to what they are currently taking home for next year and not seeing a reduction in their paycheck, where I can't comment necessarily on every other district, but what Dave already alluded to is it's going to be really tough. So I think the other component I would throw into that is, this is a year-by-year proposition at this point. We're doing the very best we can, I think, in preparing for 2021, recognizing that this may have a much longer impact which is going to require us to look really closely at how our salary and compensation schedule is constructed, what revenue we can count on in that process, and ultimately, in order to bring in more revenue, what steps we may have to take in exploring other options to do so. I don't want that to be too vague. It's just multiple moving parts in that space.
So I have a rough number there for you, Mr. Schwartz. If a staff member had started out at MA step 5 in 16-17, and they maintained just that MA level status and they moved to level 10, so they started at 5 and moved to level 10 in 5 years, their salary would now be $48,259 or $7,822, or roughly 19%.
So that's the CAGR over 5 years, 19%.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay.
And that does not include any type of level change for educational level. On average, a staff member who, once they attain their master's, on average, about every 5 to 6 years, they will move over an educational level, an educational lane at 15 semester credits. Some do not.
That creates a higher foundational baseline, right?
Well, yeah, you go from 48,259, they'd go to 49,582.
Yeah, so about a 2%.
Yeah, another 2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a staff member can conceivably be over to level 10. What makes this very difficult to compare is that we added a lane in 18-19. We added a lane and we did a major reconstruction of the salary schedule for 18-19. And then we also gave steps back the year prior to that at the tune of $750,000 approximately.
Right. Well, thank you all for what you're doing. It's a very important component.
I have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I go ahead?
Go ahead, Ms. Phillips.
I just had a question about timing because last I reviewed, and Tiffany, you might be able to help me. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, I was following some of the state legislature announcements, and the budget, the long bill is not even going to the Senate until slated for May 25th. So that puts us on quite a delayed schedule. Does that, I guess my question is, does that alter anything that the board needs to do in June in terms of approving the budget? We're just on a shorter timeline, if I understand it.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Dave,
yeah.
do you want to tackle that, or I can?
Yeah, the anticipation, you're right. Yeah, we're going to have that. We're going to have everything built in draft form for you guys to look at as far as the expenditures go. That pretty much that isn't going to really change too much unless we have some real drastic cuts at like 6%. Then I think we have to have some of those conversations. But the expenditures right now are at a real conservative point. And so I don't think there needs to be a lot of adjustment there, but what it's going to do is it's going to affect the fund balance a little bit more. And so what we're going to probably need to do is have a special session early in June once we get that final number and we can give you the correct revenue expenditure number. And then we'll finalize it at the June board meeting. That would be the plan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and as of now, our official board meeting for June is scheduled for June 15th. Our goal would still be to have a preliminary budget presented at least a couple of weeks ahead of that and be able to have a finalized budget for approval at the 15th. If we need to push that back, then we have until the 30th to be able to officially have that approval from the board.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
So I have a quick comment real quick. Yeah, Teresa, yeah, that's what I understood also, but that was a good question, is if we got pushed back because the legislature is pushing back. And obviously at the state level, they're going to be looking for ways to make up their income from, I think we're going to see some tightening belts all over the state, not just in school districts, but at the state level also with Medicaid and Medicare and unemployment. But I appreciate, I want to extend my appreciation that that we prioritize those steps for our teachers, and I can appreciate the need to look at this on a year by year basis because there's a lot of uncertainty right now. At the same time, if it comes down to it, my perspective is that we would, as a board, be able to be in a position to ask our superintendent to ensure that we are prioritizing our staff and we are prioritizing those steps to make sure that they're getting their pay first before, obviously we have to make sure the district's running, but if we have to tighten belts someplace else, I just want to make sure that we're taking care of our teachers and our staff first.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Upchurch. Any additional questions or concerns?
Yeah, this is Chris. If I could make a couple comments, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Taylor.
So the Colorado School Finance Project, which is by the State Finance Committee, released some information in April of 2020, just a week or two ago. Mm-hmm. And if I just use, the message here is that they gave us a graph from 2008-09 up through 2021. And if I just use the first year rather than, the fiscal year, so I'll start with 2008. In 2008, between 2008, which we all can remember, as some referred to as the Great Recession. And what happened was from 2008 to 2009, the state funding dropped by almost 6%. From 2009 to 2010, it dropped another 8%. From 2010 to 2011, it dropped another almost 3%. And from 2011 to 2012, it dropped another 3.5% before it started working the other direction. The point here is that we don't know what will happen in this year's legislature, and we don't know that this COVID-19 economic impact will be as long-term as the 2008 Great Recession. So there's a lot of unknowns, but the point I'm trying to make here is that we could be in a revenue struggle for more than just 1 year. This could last a couple years or more. So, I appreciate the budget as you presented it right now. And based on what we know about next year, it could drop, it could stay even, it could drop, according to the School Finance Project, again, it could drop 8%, 10%, or 12%. They're showing three different ranges of funding reductions for 2021. Almost wish my good friend Mark Popp were here to help me feel better about it, but I think what we're going to face here are some really hard decisions. And unfortunately, we don't have the same levy rate as every other school district in this county. So it's going to hit us harder than most. And we need to monitor pretty closely the state school finance to determine what they're doing to us and to be prepared, because some drastic measures were taken last time to survive. And they were literally survival measures. I hope we don't get into that, but we have to start putting that into our work sessions. So Dr. Summers, I'm just pleading with you to, in our work sessions, start informing the board and the community about everything we can learn from the State Finance Committee and what the impacts look like. And I know, just as everything has changed daily for the last 4 weeks, which feels like 4 years, it will change. There's no way you're going to give us an answer. I get that, but we just need to have a mechanism in place that we're monitoring it very closely.
Absolutely.
That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very insightful comments. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Are there any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, this is Mr. Schwartz. I just had one other question with respect to finances, especially as we think about challenging scenarios. Has there been any activity from the state with respect to the K through 12 funding in the CARES Act?
What I can
You
share
know-
with you, or Dave, you can chime in too. All I can share with you at this point is that we are still awaiting direction from the state in terms of how they will determine to distribute those funds. We're hearing everything from a possible flow through to each district, which would more than likely be based on total enrollment each district. And my understanding of that funding source, if we are given some pot that we're going to be working with, that we have a lot of flexibility of what we are doing with those funds. The other component that may not be talked about very publicly, but is also a function of relief with these times that we're in, is Fema reimbursement. Now, there's some limitations to how those funds could actually be allocated toward reimbursing essentially staff that are working, mileage that's incurred as a result of that work, and any materials or supplies that are purchased as a result of our efforts to combat COVID-19. So that is something that we are pursuing in terms of the application process and getting reimbursement funding. And as far as CARES goes, at this point, I don't know that we have a whole lot more other than a wait and see approach to what may happen with those funds. Dave, is there anything else you'd add to that?
Nope, that's it. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. So yeah, no, there's exactly the flow through, or if it's going to be through our funding formula. We do not know.
Thank you both.
Are there any additional questions? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next agenda item, English language learner and exceptional student update. Ms. Johnson and Mr. Frampton.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing Dr. Johnson and I to present tonight. I look forward to this every year, and as usual, they're memorable, but I don't know if any will be more memorable than this one, let me tell you, sitting in our living room. I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Stephanie Johnson, who's our EL program facilitator, and let her start, and then I will follow up when she's done, and we'll wrap up with any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Rick. Like to give you an overview of our program and how we do EL program here at Lewis Palmer School District. The first thing is people often want to know, how is this EL student identified? Well, we have federal and state legislation that we have to follow as far as how our students are identified. The main way is by the parents. When the parents or guardian fill out the home language or fill out the student registration, there's a big portion of that that's a home language survey. And if they mark that there's another language at home, that's how the student gets identified. Sometimes that kind of slips through the cracks, and we can also have a teacher who brings up that they think a student may have another language besides English, and then we can take a look and see if that student would qualify for EL services. So how do they qualify for EL services once we know there's another language at home? Is we have a WIDA screener, and the WIDA screener is used throughout the state of Colorado, and it's also used in many other states throughout the US. So it's a very common assessment that we use, and that determines whether a student gets placed into our program. Once the student is in our program, every January, there's a state assessment that we give called the Access, and that helps us to determine if the student is making growth in their English language proficiency. And we just did that test this past January, February timeframe, and next week is when we'll be getting those results. The other thing to remember is that oftentimes people say, well, the student speaks English just fine. It's a requirement that they have to test fluent in four language domains. So speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And usually writing is the is the last one that students gain fluency in. So there's a couple laws that drive our work. Obviously, the Civil Rights Act that states that we can't discriminate based on race, color, or origin. Kayes versus Denver is one that came out. It's a Supreme Court ruling that said you can't segregate EL students away from their from students that are English fluent, so they have to be in the same classroom. Well, that followed by Lau versus Nichols, which came out of San Francisco, and it was determined that, okay, well, you put the EL students in with their English fluent peers, however, they still need specific instruction to help them gain their English language proficiency, and we also need to know what language proficiency that they have. So they came out with the Lau categories that tell us at what proficiency a student is in. For example, if a student is non-English proficient, limited, or fully. Then Plyer versus Doe is another Supreme Court ruling that said you can't, that all students, regardless of immigration status, have the right to access free public education. The 1981 Castaneda versus Pickard was a big one for us because it tells us we have to have a three-pronged approach in our district. One, that we have to have solid theory, a curriculum that follows solid theory. We have to put that into practice, so we have to put that in use in the classrooms. And that we have to look at results. That are we doing well? Are we not doing well? That drives our programming. Then Essa in 2015 came along, and basically what Essa is telling us is that it requires us to include the growth of English language proficiency by our EL students into the overall statewide accountability. It also gives us the option for not assessing first time in the US students on English language arts. They do have to take the math and science CMAS and social studies, but they can not take the ELA for the first year that they're here in the US. It also, ESSA also requires us to have a formalized way of identifying students, exiting students from our program, and also stating what the expected length of a student should be in the EL program, which is about 5 to 7 years. And the last thing that ESSA did, it required all states to adopt standards. And so we have adopted the Colorado English Language Proficiency Standards from that. And the last one, I'll go back just one more slide, please. ELPA, you probably saw that in the budget. That's money that we get every year from the state. And that money is to go towards that three-pronged approach that Castaneda versus Pickard requires, that we use that money for theory-based curriculum, our resources such as personnel, and also professional development. So that kind of gives us an overview of the laws that kind of drive our programming. All right, next slide, there you go. So here are those Lau categories, came out of the Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court ruling, all the different categories that our EL students get put into. So if a student test is non-English proficient, they are an NEP, then they would move to LEP, limited English proficient. Once they gain proficiency, then we have to monitor them for 2 years. So they have a monitor year 1, monitor year 2 status. Then they go to exit year 1, exit year 2. Then they go to a FEL category. The other category that our ELs could have is what they call floats. And these are students that test fluent right away. They're bilingual and they're fluent both in English and their native language. All of these codes, categories, are recorded in Infinite Campus, and Leslie Boyce does an amazing job for us. It helps us with our October count, and that's how we get our ELPA funding. Next slide. This just kind of gives you an idea of how many students we have in our schools that are in different categories, non-English proficient, limited, and the students that are on monitor. We don't test preschool students. They're in a great learning environment as it is, so it's just K through 12. All right, next slide. So our total EL population, if you take into consideration all the different categories that we have, it actually comes out to 405 students in our school district, so about 6% of our student population. All right, next slide. So some ways that we provide EL services, we are very fortunate. We have EL teachers and tutors at every one of our buildings. Our teachers at at all schools can either push in, so they go into the student's classroom and they work alongside the student and help them out, or they can pull that student out and work in small groups in the EL room that they have. At our secondary schools, we have self-contained classrooms. So students in the secondary schools will have their own EL class where they specifically look at learning English language proficiencies. All right, next slide. So some things that are going on, we're awaiting our results from access testing that will be available a week from today. So we're excited to get those results. A big effort that our school district is undertaking is a professional development requirement that all teachers have now that has been put out by the state, where in their next 5-year licensure period, they have to have 45 hours of English language professional development. And our district, under the guidance of Dr. Benton and the help of Jess McAllister and Katie O'Sullivan and Laurel Bumpus, have put together development where our teachers can meet all the 45 hours here in our district. A lot of it is online and very convenient for our teachers. So Lewis Palmer School District is doing quite a bit to help the teachers out with this certification. Some other happenings that are funded by grants. We have our annual international dinner, which we luckily just squeaked in before we went to remote learning. We also provide homework clubs at those following schools for after-school homework support. And we also have some funding to have some tutors that help our primarily secondary students with math and science classes. Next slide. So that's the EL program in a nutshell. That's a picture of our summer school last year at Palmer Ridge High School. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have one question. You mentioned the average time in the program is 5 to 7 years. Does that 7 years, is that follow the flow chart that, and I'm sorry, I can't move the slides back, but the flow chart that had there you go. Is that a 7-year plan, or would that be the 7-year flow?
Not quite. The 7-year flow, 5 to 7 years, and that's based on averages and research, is going from NEP to monitor year 1. So going from NEP to FEP, which is fully English proficient, and that would happen in monitor year 1.
So in our district, could an elementary school age child end up being in the EL program longer than 7 years?
Yes, yep. And sometimes we do have students there, like we have acronyms for everything. They're called LTELs, long-term ELs. And yes, we have some students that are in our program for a long time.
Okay, so whatever services they need, we're able to provide. It's not like they would ever time out in some sort of funding way.
Right, no,
Okay.
we would, as long as they need our services, we provide that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. That was a wonderful presentation. And as always, Mr. Frampton, we appreciate the great work you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again. And thank you, Dr. Johnson, for all that information. I know if you ever are interested in hearing more about our programs, we are happy to share. We're giving you a very 30,000 foot abbreviated presentation. So we're always open for questions. If you ever have any, just don't hesitate to let us know. The special education side of the Exceptional Student Services team also is mandated by law, and much of what we do is directed and dictated by both the federal law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then the state law, which is the Exceptional Children's Educational Act. We are tightly constrained by the laws on how we function, all of our compliance, all of our instruction, how we write IEPs. IEP is the individualized education program that we write for every student that qualifies as a child with a disability. It all runs through these laws, and our practices are fairly tightly dictated through both of these laws. In Lewis Palmer, our identification rate is about 10.1%, or exactly 10.1%. This is based on December 1 count. of 2019. You can see we're about 1.5% below the state rate of identification. We had 683 students on December 1, and we've had an increase of 88 students since 2017, which is a fairly substantial growth. We're clearly growing faster than what the district rate is growing. And a couple reasons behind that is I think the word is out that we're doing a really nice job. And if you were to do some research on special education at the state level with our report cards, we just had our program report card come out hot off the press since I even submitted this PowerPoint on Friday. Our determination from the state came out and we received the highest qualification where we meet all of the determination factors, which include compliance, student achievement, student growth, post-secondary graduation rate and the like. So we're one of the highest performing school districts. And I think we're attracting some folks and people are coming to Lewis Palmer as a result of our reputation. That's just a guess, but I suspect that's one of the reasons our numbers are increasing at a faster rate. We have students located at all of our schools. We have programs at all of our schools, and we have a few students who qualify or who have needs in which they need to receive services outside of our schools because their needs exceed our capacity to meet them in our comprehensive school environment. So we have kids in all of those locations. The state identifies 13 different disability areas, and here's the breakdown by disability. Obviously, our largest population of kids have what's considered a specific learning disability, and that can be in 8 different discrete areas underneath either the reading, the writing, or the math umbrellas. Other health impairment is the next closest. Other health impairment often are accompanied with diagnoses from the medical field or have some other health-related impairment. Attention deficit is an example of an area that can fall under the other health impairment umbrella. Speech language disability, autism, developmental delay, and it moves down from here. The second page are what we call the low incidence disabilities, where we have a few kids in each of these areas, but they're very rare, and we don't have them to near the frequency as the other disabilities. Our service providers, currently we have 37 total special education teachers in the district, 35.7 FTE, so we have some part-time folks. Our related service providers include speech pathologists, school psychologists, school nurses, we call our motor team, which is our occupational and physical therapists. We have an adapted PE teacher. We have 3 social workers and 75 total paraprofessionals or classified staff members. I just talked about the meets requirements. We have been in the meets requirements criteria for as long as I've been here, the 4 years I've been here. And again, that's the highest rating available. And I already spoke a little bit about the 4 areas in which that is judged by. We have been focusing this year on some program goals. Every year I work with the cabinet and Dr. Summers on some goals that we want to accomplish. And this year, we have really spent a lot of time and energy looking at how we can continue to implement consistent literacy practices across the district. The vast majority of students who qualify for a disability have an impact in reading and writing and literacy. And that is one of the most important things that we can help a child with in the school setting, is to read and write. That's how they become able to function in our society. And we can never be good enough or great enough at providing literacy instruction for all kids. That's going to be an area that we're always going to focus on and always need to continue to sharpen our knife to get as good as possible there. And we're going to continue to work hard to ensure that our teachers are trained in the most up-to-date research-based practices and interventions, and that each and every student who has that need is going to have access to high-quality literacy practices. You've heard both Tiffany and Teresa talk about the SEAC at some point. They've been regular attenders to our SEAC committee. That is a very valuable group of folks who I, as the director, have relied upon greatly for input. We use that group for the Alley Day, the parent questionnaire that we send out. And that input is valuable in helping guide the direction and receiving feedback from the community on what we need to do as a team and department. And the professional growth piece is attached to the literacy practices, but one of the things we want to continue to focus on is providing professional growth for all of our staff members, not just the teachers, but our paraprofessionals, our general ed teachers who are working with students with disabilities, and ensuring that we have the training and the professional growth allowing us to work at the top of our game to meet the needs of kids with disabilities. I am super sad to announce we are not having our Alley Day award ceremony tomorrow night. We have been preparing and planning for this much of the year. It's the highlight of my year, so I personally am just super disappointed in the fact that we can't recognize the folks that have made a big difference. However, we did receive a very large number of nominations, and what we've decided we're going to do this year is we're going to honor every one of them. We're going to provide each and every nominee with a certificate of nomination, and we're going to provide them the narrative from the nomination that the nominator provided to them, and we're going to put it together in a nice package, and we're going to send it out to all of our folks so we can still continue honoring those who are going the extra mile to help kids. So even though we're not going to have the big celebration, we're still going to do all we can to recognize those folks who are touching the lives of students with special needs. So, and next year we'll just have to double up and go twice as big to make up for it. Like I've already mentioned, our SEAC does a questionnaire seeking feedback for parents. Last spring, we sent that out to every single parent of a child who has a disability. We received 107 total responses. And you can see that we have an overwhelming population of parents that have indicated satisfaction. The 4 that didn't indicate satisfaction are 4 that we care deeply about, and we're going to continue to communicate with folks and know that we're going to do all we can to reach all of the families that we work with. So even one short of 107 is, in my mind, less than satisfactory, but we are still super proud that the vast majority of families who are responding to our questionnaire are doing so, indicating satisfaction. Again, you can see the homeschool communication appears to be a strength. If we go to the next slide, meaningful access to non-disabled peers. That's one of our program missions, is to ensure that kids with disabilities have access. They have access to the school environment. No matter how impactful their disability, they have a meaningful opportunity to participate in school to the greatest extent possible. So again, many of our families are feeling strongly, they agree or strongly agree that this is in fact happening in our schools. And not only is it a legal requirement we have, but it's also a high priority that our parents have an opportunity to participate and feel like they're active participants in the development of the IEP for their children. So again, the feedback is overwhelming that we are doing a sufficient job in making sure that parents are feeling like active members of that team, which is crucial to our success for kids. Are there any questions? Anything we didn't cover? Anything you want to know more about our program? I know it was quick, and then it's hard to, in 20 minutes, summarize the work of 2 big departments.
I have
a question. Go ahead.
I have a comment and a question. I appreciate so much what both of you do. I've just caught glimpses of it the last 2 years, and it is significant. So I think, and just the rise in the number of students here who are being helped through D38 services is an indication of a job well done or beyond well done. I wanted to ask, given the unique circumstances of the last 6 weeks, if you might expound a little bit on how are you addressing special needs and learning opportunities, online access to teachers and paraprofessionals, et cetera, for our special needs population.
Yeah, happy to. We had the opportunity the Monday after spring break. It's one of the few opportunities I've had to actually speak with every single special ed provider in the school district. We brought us all together and we sat down and talked about, starting with our philosophy, which is first and foremost, we need to connect. We need to connect with the people, and we need to ensure that every single child is connected with by our staff, and we can start individualizing for the kids. How are we going to make this work? And our special ed teachers have been working diligently to adjust, adapt, and come up with solutions to help kids access their school to the greatest extent possible in this environment. Unfortunately, this environment is less than ideal for all kids, but especially kids with disabilities who are impacted by a disability. This is even more complex. So our special ed teachers are providing direct service through what we call either synchronous or asynchronous learning. So they're doing lots of webinars, they're making phone calls to home, they're checking in, they're sending emails. They're consulting with the general ed teachers to ensure that the general ed classes are accessible for students. And we're making sure that we're modifying the curriculum or accommodating the way that we are using the remote learning so that kids think with vision impairments are able to access the class to the greatest extent possible. Our paraprofessionals are doing an amazing job. They're rolling up their sleeves and they're working with kids in this environment. We've had staff, we've had teachers, we have paraprofessionals who are actually taking materials and driving them to students' homes, dropping off math manipulatives so they can actually have the math tools in their hands as they're working through the online learning. We have paraprofessionals at our secondary schools who are attending classes in the general ed and helping with the note taking and the tests and getting familiar with that environment so they can support our kids. So there's a lot of ways that we're meeting kids, and quite honestly, it's working better than I could have ever hoped. And I think that speaks volumes to just the commitment and the devotion our staff and faculty have towards kids with disabilities.
Thank you.
Chris, I have a question, but Chris, did you have one first?
Teresa beat me to it, but thanks for the reply.
I have one other question as well. Last year, when they passed the legislation for identifying dyslexia, is that when I was looking at the numbers, the slide on our, that one.
Yep, the one before it, yep.
Yep. So does dyslexia fall under one of those, or does it have to?
Yes, can you move one previous to this one? There you go. That dyslexia is considered a specific learning disability, and we capture any student who's been identified with dyslexia, whose dyslexia impacts them to a degree in which they can't receive what we call reasonable benefit from general ed alone. That's the standard in which we determine, because there's many kids with dyslexia that are receiving reasonable benefit and don't necessarily need the support from an IEP, and they might get support through a 504, or some students may be able to still function without any planned support. But the kids who's impacted to the point in which it is impacting their education, the vast majority of them fall under a specific learning disability.
Okay. And my other question is, thank you for bringing the Elorium Day Awards to our district. For any of the other board members that don't know, that was Rick's brainchild, and it's been here at D38, and it's been really touching. Is there a way that we as a district can highlight some of those online?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good idea, and I'd be happy to work with Julie to come up with a way to honor the nominees on our website. I think that would be a great way to start, and maybe we can put our heads together and see if there's some creative ways to highlight some of the great things that are happening, because it is super special. I appreciate you saying it's my brainchild. This is a collaborative group. It's a lot of work from a lot of folks. Our SEAC team gets a lot of credit for coming up with that idea, and it really is a super special opportunity that takes a lot of people to pull off. So it's a team effort for sure.
Yeah, and I would just dovetail on that and add that it's beyond just a district event. It's a really uplifting whole community event. So I think it affects a lot of people in very positive ways.
Yeah, I would love to say if you come tomorrow night, because you can't really comprehend just how amazing it is. I have always highlighted, if you want to see a grown man cry, come watch this and you'll see me cry. It usually happens about halfway through. And like I said, we'll have to double up next year and make it twice as good.
I'll volunteer to help again.
Thank you. That means more than you know. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Frampton.
Yes, thank you, everybody. You have a great evening.
You too.
All right, Dr. Benton, I believe you're next up on the agenda.
Great. So what you have before you is the 6 through 8 ELA or English Language Arts adoption. And I was wondering if you had any questions. The packet does include quite a bit of information around the product that was chosen for 6th through 8th grade. I think that's enough wait time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Benton. We sincerely appreciate everything you do for our kids.
Sure. The only thing I would also just add is that this was a great collaborative effort, and a shout out to Devon Johnson and all of the teachers who worked on all of our curriculum recommendations. It is a very long process, starts in the fall, and they work tirelessly. So you got this request a month late because we wanted to make sure every teacher was consistent with the voice of what they wanted in the curriculum. And so thank you very much for letting us bring this one on after we'd already brought in all the others. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is there still opportunity to ask a question?
There is.
So I just found my spot, Dr. Benton. Oh, I don't know if there's a page number. So I'm looking at the page that says proposal to adopt instructional resources and materials, and it's category 1, instructional resources and materials. There was just that one X that ended up in the acceptable column, and it was about objectionable material. There it is. But I didn't know why that was, in the example, teachers feel confident with the resources selected. But is there any explanation as to why that wasn't rated superior?
So when we look at a rating, obviously acceptable is the category where teachers feel like it's something that they would still be willing to put in front of you. The other thing you have to keep in mind with English language arts curriculum adoptions is that these are massive, a lot of them are anthologies, massive collections of content material. What we try to do is then meet and narrow to make sure that it meets the curriculum map, the standards. So these are more like, basically, do you remember the old anthology book that you picked up when you went to English class, and it was a massive compilation and you didn't read everything in it? So what typically we find is that we have some pieces that wouldn't fit our community, but it doesn't mean that we want to take the entire adoption and not adopt it. because we do believe that our teachers have pretty solid judgment and know our students and our community. So that's why that was marked that way. But you'll notice that there's within the example column, there's a comment that says teachers feel confident with the resources collected, meaning that the teachers know that they can find the right content for what they need at the right grade level.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
That's all I had.
Thank you again, Dr. Benton. Moving on to the first reading of revisions to policies JICDA, JII, JKD, and JKE. Mr. Foster?
Yes, the board has before you JIKD. These policies are all student discipline policies. All of the changes, as you have probably noticed on this one, have to do with the suspension of third grade, first K-1-2 students, has to do with legislative changes as to discipline, what discipline can be brought against a student that young. So these are all changes that reflect legal changes in the law changing on this. Any questions? I'll make my wait time less than Lori's. No questions?
Right, and then we have the second reading of revisions to policies ILBC, JLCD, JLCDB. Are there any questions, comments, concerns on those before we take a vote?
So I just was going to say thank you, Mr. Foster, for clarifying. I had some questions on these ones at our last board meeting on how we define, for example, nutritional supplement. And what was going through my mind was, an emergency packet that my son flavors his water with, would that be considered okay or not? But thank you for clarifying that that's not a medication, and this is more along the lines of what nurses administer to students.
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You bet.
I'd like to make a motion to approve new policy IHCDA. Actually, bear with me. Yep. I'd like to make a motion to approve the new policy IHCDA, concurrent enrollment, accompanying by procedure IHCDA-R, concurrent enrollment procedure as presented.
Matt, I'm sorry, but aren't we on item 5, which is ILBC and JLCD?
You know what, Chris? I apologize. I jumped ahead, so thank you. That's what happens when I'm scrolling down on my computer. I'd like to make a motion to approve the revisions to policies ILBC, Early Literacy Read Act, JLCD, Administering Medications, and JLCD, Administration of Medical Marijuana to Qualified Students on School District Property as presented.
Second.
Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right. Now I'm moving on to second reading of new policy IHCDA and procedure IHCDA-R. Are there any questions for Mr. Foster?
Okay, I'm going to jump in again because I also brought this one up at our last board meeting. And as I understand the clarification, my only concern was that the spirit of the policy itself, I think is good. It's a great policy. Especially the fact that we're opening doors for students and opening more opportunities. And so the policy is solid. My only question was that second paragraph. But the way I understand it is students still have that process is still in place, that if a student needs to have a discussion with a principal over it or family, they still can. Is that correct? Do I
That is
understand?
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm good.
All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote to approve new policy IHCDA concurrent enrollment as its accompanying procedure IHCDA-R concurrent enrollment procedure as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Namika. Now we'll go through the enrollment data. Is there any questions regarding the data?
I'd just make one comment if I could, and that is that our elementary classes across the board are all growing. It's the big loss was Monument Academy and Lewis Palmer a little bit and Palmer Ridge quite a bit. And otherwise we're growing, but those three areas, the two high schools and the Monument Academy is equal to our growth almost, which is contrary in some respects to the demography's report.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Are there any other questions or comments before we move on?
So I have a quick question, and maybe this is a question for Dr. Summers. So I looked, for example, Palmer Lake Elementary had 7 new first graders, and that's quite a lot of first graders to take on. How many class sections, how many first grade sections are at Palmer Lake for first grade?
I believe we are looking at 3 sections there.
Okay. That's what,
You can
7
find that
kids?
for me, because I just want to make sure I'm accurate. I believe it's 3 teachers at first grade. Or am I off on that?
Which school?
Palmer Lake.
Oh.
Actually, I think we're looking at 2. I'm
teachers.
sorry, we're looking at 2. I was looking at a different column. So we're at 20, I believe we're at 21 and 22 class size currently.
That's with the 7 new ones.
The other, yes, so.
It's 21 per, 22 per.
Yep, Ms. Upchurch, I apologize. We're at 2 there, 21, 22.
Okay.
One
Any
last
additional
question, if I
questions?
might. Yeah, I have one last question, and I'm curious as to, this is as of 4/1, right? And our shutdown occurred prior to this. So why wouldn't most of these counts be under the homeschool enrichment program, since that's sort of what we're doing today?
Well,
Because they didn't sign up for it, Chris.
that's a good laugh, Chris. We're obviously working through the assigned school that our students are working through, so that it's a lot more than just homeschool enrichment. However, I appreciate that a lot of parents are probably feeling like it's a lot of homeschool enrichment.
Thank you.
Good perspective.
I also noticed that we had a jump in 7th grade as well.
Yes.
And if there's no other comments on this topic, we'll move on to the financial impact data. Are there any questions regarding this report?
Yes. So again, now this report is as of the end of March, obviously, since April hasn't closed yet. But what I'm most curious about is what have we done? And do we have an estimate of the cost savings associated with not running school buses, not having buildings open, keeping the lights off, not picking up the trash, et cetera, et cetera. Now I know that our budget is 78% salary based, so I don't expect any kind of savings there. But I'm really curious of what might the school district see in April, May, and June as a result of this COVID-19 shutdown.
So I can speak generally, and then Dave, I don't know if you're still on. If I know that's something that we've talked about, not necessarily developed in terms of a specific dollar amount as of this point. That's something that we could certainly prepare as we go into the next work session. I think there's two factors that we have to keep in mind. One is, yes, there are some operational savings that we're experiencing, from energy savings to not running our buses to just essentially staying more or less closed. I do think it's important to acknowledge that as we have purchased hotspot and Wi-Fi enabled devices and distributed those, as well as food distribution, which currently is not being subsidized, and continuing to keep our employees on payroll, I don't believe that we're going to see a significant savings. In other words, it's more or less offset by what it's costing us to still maintain operations. And that's something that I think we can be a little bit more definitive about as we monitor this, keeping in mind we're week 6 of being shut down, more or less. Dave, is there anything else you'd add to that?
No, now I'm off mute. Yeah, I was going to say it. Let's see. Again, yeah, we're looking at 12% of the budget, and we are seeing, obviously, some, for lack of a better word, freeze on ordering. We don't need the area, so yeah, we are going to have some savings. But there is some technology expenses as well as some other pieces. So I think you're right, Dr. Summers. It'll offset each other. It won't be a lot of savings there yet, but it'll be interesting to see as we get through it and as we look at our information, probably by the end of May.
Dr. Summers,
Thank you very much.
Wanted to ask a follow-on question. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to make the point that I think from a budgeting and planning perspective, we've got to start really tightening our belts. I don't know what the revenue impact is going to be, but given what happened 12 years ago and for the 4 subsequent years, until we get a better feel for the length of this economic downturn, I mean, it will be a full depression with 2 quarters of lack of growth. The real question and the uncertainty is a rebound. And if we still have to utilize social distancing for another year or year and a half, that means we're not going to have a fast turnaround. And so I just can't say strongly enough to all of us that we have to be really careful with our budgeting and planning process to ensure that, we can maintain a semblance of a good education system without having to go through the kind of drastic measures that occurred 12 years ago. So thank you.
Appreciate that, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Dr. Summers, I just wanted to follow on. You just mentioned, I think if I understood correctly, that food distribution is not being subsidized. I thought we were coordinating with Tri-Lakes Cares, but is that not the... Was there some coordination with Tri-Lakes Cares initially over spring break?
There was. The very first week that we initiated well, we weren't even really in remote learning at that point. So it was the first 2 weeks. It was the week of, I believe, March 16th and then the week of March 23rd. We essentially were not in a position at that time to facilitate food distribution from our sites. So we engaged in that partnership with Tri-Lakes Cares at that point in time. We were still partnering per se. There's facilitation between both entities in terms of making sure that specific families who have needs that even go beyond just the food distribution are getting support from Tri-Lakes Cares, which we're very grateful for. So the food distribution that we launched, I believe it was March 29th, has been on average, I want to say it's between 225, 250 meals that are distributed on a daily basis. So, or Monday through Friday. So what our plan is, at least through the rest of the school year, is to maintain that distribution pattern. In terms of what the cost of that actually is, that's something that we can, again, put a precise dollar amount to as we share with you that analysis. And then there is a consideration to also see if we roll that into the summer. And that will be something that we'll have to make a decision at a later date. But hopefully that answered your question, Ms. Phillips. I'm not sure if I took all parts of that.
Yeah, no, it did. I think I made an assumption based on information from 3 or 4 weeks ago, which obviously it's a fluid situation. So thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Thank you for that question.
Are there any additional questions on this topic? All right, then let's move on to the consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments regarding any of the agenda items before we take a vote? Okay, I'd like to make a...
Matt, I'm sorry.
No,
this
you're
is
fine.
actually a retroactive question about the consent agenda last month, where we approved the purchase of 10 buses. What's the status of that? Is that a done deal? Can it be delayed? I'm just curious.
Well, actually, that's a wonderful question, Mr. Taylor. The order was actually cut in half, so we're only purchasing 5 buses.
Good update. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? All right. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Namika, would you please take the vote?
Mr. Clausen,
Aye.
Ms. Phillips,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there any other business that needs to be conducted tonight before we stand adjourned? All right, well, thank you all again for appearing via Zoom, and I also appreciate everyone that's here with me at Big Red to make sure that this meeting went off without a hitch. You all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank